defense. So the U.S. government's goal is to disrupt, dismantle, and defeat al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan by pursuing the following objectives within Afghanistan. First is to deny al-Qaeda a safe haven. Second is to reverse the Taliban's momentum and deny the ability to overthrow the Afghan government. And third is to strengthen the capacity of Afghanistan's security forces and the Afghan government so that they can take the lead responsibility for Afghanistan's future. The three core elements of this strategy to achieve these objectives are a military effort to improve security and create the conditions for a transition, a civilian surge that reinforces positive action, and finally an effective partnership with Pakistan. So if you're wondering what we're doing in Afghanistan, that pretty succinctly sets it out there. My opinion is that for the first time in a number of years, since about 2009, 2010 is when it started to emerge, we have a coherent military strategy and the means to make it work. And I think it's important for us to recognize how under-resourced Afghanistan was for a number of years for all sorts of reasons. And it's easy to say, hey, look, we've been there 10 years, it's not worked out. I think there's a big difference between a properly resourced, well-thought-out strategy than what we had before, which may have been some form of strategy, but it certainly wasn't properly resourced for success. And so that means you can't discount what has happened between 2001 and 2009, because it's certainly part of what we're dealing with today, but it also means that the 9 years ahead of us are not necessarily going to be the same as the 9 years behind us. So you have a stronger commitment today. So one of the big changes was leadership, first with General McChrystal, now with General Petraeus. You have stronger commitments of troops with less caveats, much less caveats from NATO. You see the surge of an additional 30,000 troops in Afghanistan over the last couple of months, and significantly ramped up operations because of these troop increases. I'll talk about that in a little bit. You see a developing political strategy, which is absolutely essential, and it has to address the following areas for any chances of success. I talked already about how the Bonn Agreement in 2001 made an overly strong central government, focused too much power in Kabul, where effectively every local level official was appointed from Kabul. That needs to be countered in some ways by strengthening the legitimacy of the government and pushing some of that power out to the provincial levels. Strengthening the legitimacy of the government is the key issue of an insurgency, and it is important for a counterinsurgency force to build up the legitimacy of the government in cooperation with the host nation. So we are working hard on strengthening the provincial and local government, that form of government that makes its connections most directly with the people. We are pushing an anti-corruption agenda, which is a huge debilitating issue in Afghanistan right now, as you see in the news. Trying to end the predatory practices of the government against its people, which helps fuel the insurgency. And another piece of this has to be some form of reconciliation. This is my personal opinion. Some form of reconciliation with the Taliban, and they've got some concerns that they want to have addressed before they come to the negotiating table. Again, does this mean that they're going to be able to install burqas and do these other things? No, but I think there is a chunk of the Taliban insurgency that can be cut away and brought back in and renounce violence and rejoin the Afghan state. Almost every effective counterinsurgency has included a piece of effective reconciliation with its fighters to bring it back. I think we saw this most effectively in Iraq just a few years ago, as Sunni insurgent groups came back and pledged support to their government and then fought to stay away. There's a clear, let's skip ahead. In terms of President Karzai, he gets a tremendous amount of bad press. I'm sure some of it is deserving, but it is interesting now how he has gone from the U.S. darling in the early couple of years now to almost the source of all evil. The fact of the matter is, it's probably a little bit more nuanced than all of that. It's important to realize with President Karzai that he has, and I do not want to be an apologist for him at all, but I just do want to explain a little bit, that he has a domestic political constituency. He is the elected leader of the Afghan people. It would be the political death of him, and maybe the literal death of him, if he were to be seen by his people as being a stooge of the Americans. And so at certain issues that resonate with the Afghan people, he has an obligation as their leader to stand up to the Americans when they think that we are making a mistake. I know that's very frustrating for us to understand, but in the bigger context, that's what we want. We want a strong government that can actually rule its own country. So President Karzai has come down hard on a number of issues: night raids, civilian casualties, and the presence of contractors within Afghanistan. All of those are frustrating things as the military to deal with, but I think it's important to understand that that comes from him trying to create a domestic, listen to his domestic political constituency. Just as a politician, the United States has to listen to his own. Interestingly, as he pushes back the United States and the international security forces on these sort of issues, it buys him space to be able to offer us other long-term proposals that can be seen in our long-term strategic interests. As someone recently said, who's in a position to understand that when he pushes back on civilian casualties, when he pushes back on night raids, when he pushes back on contractors, that buys him the political space where he can then negotiate with the Americans for a long-term basing in Afghanistan, which will probably be crucial for our continuing fight on terrorists coming out of that area. The President has articulated a clear deadline for the transition to Afghan control by 2014. The final plan is emerging for this transition. I think President Karzai is expected to give a speech on this topic within the month. I don't personally think that's going to mean the end of U.S. involvement. It may mean a transition in terms of what we're doing. I think we'll still be there in smaller numbers and in different roles. I think we'll be mentoring their military forces. I think we'll be advising their civilian government. I think we'll still be in the development assistance business. And I think we'll still be heavily involved in counterterrorism. In terms of military operations, what's happening today? I think the command structure, which was very debilitating for a number of years, has been straightened out and streamlined. I think the numbers of forces are finally commensurate with the task that's been laid in front of them. And I think it is important to emphasize to the general American public, many of whom don't have a lot of contact with their military, just how incredibly more proficient the military has become over 10 years of conflict. You now have plenty of leaders, in every service who have spent a lot of time overseas, and the increasing effectiveness of the United States military in fighting these sort of wars is particularly impressive, and it has been through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of service members have been lost, but the military has gotten much better at doing this. I'd also like to highlight the sort of shadowy role of special operations, which has become just as incredibly effective in the missions that they are assigned. And just as one small statistic, Afghan and international security forces within Afghanistan in the last 90 days have conducted 1,700 operations. They've killed or captured 370 insurgent leaders and captured 1,900 different insurgents, which is almost an unimaginable pace of operations from the Afghanistan that I knew in 01 to 06. So what do military operations do? Military operations can really only be an enabler to the political process. It is important for the Taliban to feel that they cannot win, so that they are therefore forced to come to the negotiating table and find a political settlement to this issue, all of which I think is possible. And part and parcel with the growth of our presence there, huge commitment to developing the Afghan national security forces, both the Army, and the local police, and the Afghan National Police. Current perceptions, sort of what I hear, and just some thoughts on that. There has been a huge, very significant spike in violence from 2009 to 2010 that was completely expected and anticipated as we increase more U.S. and international troops and go into these neighborhoods where they have controlled and held sway, the enemy's held sway for a number of years. That is absolutely to be expected. Progress has been made, and for the first time in a long time, talking to a whole host of different sources, whether they're aid workers or journalists or my friends who are in the military, there is a sense of optimism right now in Afghanistan that sometimes doesn't always come through. Most notably, the Kandahar operations. Kandahar, the key city to the insurgents in southern Afghanistan, the home of Mullah Omar, who's the head of the Taliban. Those operations there have been very successful so far, and I think it remains to be seen what happens. What you're seeing now is the end of the traditional lull and the beginning of the fighting season will start up in end of March to the beginning of April. We'll see whether the gains that have been made over the last 6 to 8 months actually hold. There's a tremendous amount of optimism, and I think it is fair to say that what has happened is the combined effect of these operations as these Taliban fighters have come to Afghanistan and really been hurt in many different ways. They're starting to have these huge risks with their leadership, which is largely stayed in Pakistan and not come across the border because they know it's too dangerous for them to come in. And again, I think that all creates the opportunities for bringing these elements of the Taliban, certainly not all of it, and reconciling. Some other just current observations and perceptions. Cell phone usage in Taliban, they're probably about cell phone usage in Afghanistan. In the Taliban, there are about 500 cell phones right now. About 15 million, so more than half the population has cell phones. Education is one statistic. I think you've all seen the education of women, the increase in national education. But between 92 and 2001, total number of students enrolled in college had dropped down to 7,800. Presently, there are about 98,000 Afghans who are enrolled in colleges across Afghanistan, all of whom has created an educated group who can help run their country later on. Electricity, I'm not going to bore you with statistics about electricity, but I will tell you, my first trip in Kabul was in February 2002, and driving down the road at night, there was not a single light generated from any form of central electricity. It was all generator-based, and Kabul was an effectively dead city. At nighttime, flying into there about a year ago now, coming in a helicopter at night, it looked like you were flying into Las Vegas. I mean, large central electrical grid, all sorts of electricity coming from there. I mean, a complete, literally night and day difference between the two. It's important to realize that in a country like Afghanistan and in Iraq before, in this stage of where they are, the Afghan people are going to be very cautious. Okay? And sometimes that's very frustrating for Americans, not necessarily sitting here in the room, but those of us who are dealing with it, because we want them to believe us, they want us to buy into the goodness of Americans, they want us to come to our side and their government side. But I think it's really, really important, this came home to me when I was in Iraq, that when I travel to Iraq or Afghanistan, I travel alone, and I travel with 800 or 1,000 of my closest friends, all of them are heavily armed, and my family remains very safely. My family remains very safely here in the United States. When they make a decision, the consequences of their decisions are visited not just on them, visited on their wives, on their children, on their extended families. They are playing for everything. There is no backup plan if they pick the wrong side. And if they pick the wrong side and they've messed with the wrong people, what they get to watch is to watch their family get slaughtered in front of them, and they get to be the last one to die. That will breed a significant sense of caution and a significant degree of fence-sitting, waiting to see which way this is going to go. And I don't think that's an Afghan reaction. I think that's a very human reaction that we have to understand, which is why creating security for them to feel they can walk to one side, our side hopefully, and turn against the insurgency is absolutely vital. And I think that's what that troop surge is all about. I'll hitch it with an interesting statistic that I think will be pretty surprising to you, again, based on popular sort of conceptions. In December, BBC and ABC did a poll of Afghans, and 1,700 Afghans, and they asked this question: do you strongly support, somewhat oppose, or strongly oppose the presence of the following groups in Afghanistan today? Of the Taliban, 11%, only 11% of Afghans said they strongly supported or supported the presence of the Taliban in Afghanistan. For foreign jihadi fighters, those foreign fighters who are coming in to fight, the international forces there, Afghans said, about 17% of Afghans said they supported the presence of jihadi fighters. What do they say about Americans? Afghans said, in this poll, 63% supported or strongly supported the presence of U.S. forces in Afghanistan, and 53% supported or strongly supported the presence of NATO or international security assistance force members. So again, Taliban's polling at 11% support, the United States polling at 63% support. You don't get that sense very frequently, but I think it highlights how this is not a wildly popular insurgency, and there's still a tremendous amount of legitimacy that's bestowed upon and support bestowed upon the United States if we can create the security conditions to watch that come to fruition. Now, I have not talked about Pakistan. I'll hit it briefly. I can hit more questions if you'd like. Just finished a 2-day conference looking at Pakistan, sort of geopolitics of Pakistan. It's important when you look at Pakistan, and it can be very frustrating to look at. You've got to first step in the shoes of Pakistan and understand their perspective. And you can think you don't agree with it, you can think it's irrational, but you still have to understand how Pakistan looks at the world. The fact of the matter is, many Pakistanis think that they've been betrayed by the United States a number of different times. They think that they were betrayed when we cut off aid to them in the mid-1990s when they started a nuclear program. They certainly feel like we betrayed them when we just sort of turned our back to them after they helped us in expelling the Soviet Union from Afghanistan, and they really weren't interested in creating a stable neighboring country, and so the Pakistanis felt like they were left in the lurch with this chaotic region on their western border, and we just weren't interested in the mid-1990s to give much amount of assistance. We've been more than eager in giving them assistance in fomenting a rebellion or an insurgency against the Soviets.